Alrighty, welcome back to the big show. I'm Jamel Hartman. It's the Daily Hour brought to you by the BAC Group of Companies, Medical House, Lindos, and People's Pharmacy. Please do not forget, fill out the survey, subscribe on our website, follow us on all of our social media channels to stay up to date with all that we have going on. Help us grow beyond the mic as we do our part to continue to improve our community. Also, please ensure you give us a like, a love, follow, share this conversation with your friends, your family, your colleagues. As I stated on Facebook this morning, which I read to you all earlier, politics really is about accountability. There are a lot of people who are upset, some really literally crying over the result in the US presidential election. People are hurt, and I get it. But that's because you don't understand that your power goes beyond the vote. Part of having someone like Jarion Richardson on this morning and the various politicians who've been on here is our connection to them, our ability to have direct conversations and hold them accountable. That's your responsibility. Stop believing that your ancestors just fought for your right to vote. It's beyond that. You have a right, especially in a small community like Bermuda. Once you vote, you then hold the people, whether you voted for them or not, accountable to you, because a government is made up of the people for the people. One way or another, we're going to lift your spirits around here because life will go on. Without further ado, let's bring in our guest for the day. We've got Jarion Richardson, the opposition leader. Let's give him a warm TDH. Welcome, folks. Welcome. How are you, sir?
Morning, everybody. Morning, Jamel. How are you?
I'm good. First off, I before we jump into anything, I told a joke earlier. I told a couple. And the crowd's pretty tough. So I want to say, if the OBA is having any sort of like, what's that thing the PLP is having coming up, a gala or anything like that, and you need some entertainment, I am for, I'm
well, I think I might have to use Maya because her expression after your joke was priceless. I was in stitches about that.
Tough crowd. She's a tough one. It is Days of the Year. It was actually Men Make Dinner Day or something. Do you know how to cook?
Yeah, when I was when I was a bachelor in the police, the older constables, I was describing my dating life or lack thereof, I guess. And they said, you got to learn how to cook. That'll get them. And I remember they gave me these recipes from this cookbook. I can't remember, some British chef. And so I did it. And I cooked that meal for my now wife.
Man, look. Man, see, fellas, the moral of the story is, instead of taking her on a romantic dinner, make her a romantic dinner. I like that. See,
coming in impressed.
All right, well, let's jump into today's conversation. First off, again, thank you for coming on. It is early, and thank you for engage with us and the audience. But let's start with the by-election last month. EOBA candidate Carl Nesbitt, for lack of better words, came dead last of the 4 candidates who contested the recent by-election in 36.
Yeah.
What do you and the One Bermuda Alliance make of that result?
There's a couple big takeaways. When we look at Somerset, we have to look at Somerset as part of a very specific kind of community in Bermuda. So Bermuda obviously is made up of lots of different communities, and Somerset is a very specific kind of community. And C36, which is in Somerset, doesn't constitute all of Somerset. So you have to start there. It's also a place that historically has supported the Progressive Labour Party, and really hasn't varied from that in any meaningful way. We looked at the circumstances that residents in Somerset were facing specifically. So infrastructure was obviously poor. I mentioned the casuarina tree growing out of this building. I don't know, it sort of makes me angry for some reason. And obviously an increase in crime and a decrease in police presence. So we looked at all that when we put our campaign together, and Carl being an intrinsic part of that. And then seeing that result gave us the ability to reflect and go, okay, well, what have we misunderstood either about the circumstances or about the campaign, the candidacy, the circumstance. So the long and the short really boils down to, in a 4-horse race, amongst other things, that there is a very strong Progressive Labor Party element there. That's a no-brainer. But the FDM obviously has an ability to communicate and touch residents, and the independents seem to be a kind of a protest vote. And the One Bermuda Alliance finishing last told us, okay, look, there's these points that we have to improve on. So it was a very informative process, the postmortem.
And, just to follow up with that, there has been a lot of talk. The Honorable Mark Bean mentioned it after the election. Former government minister, the Honorable Renee Webb, spoken on it as well when we asked. But what is the OBA's stance? I said it. My personal opinion is that I think if we put egos aside and collaborated, we could do what I think that is necessary is challenge the PLP on all fronts. And when I say challenge, I'm not saying that let's get together and take them out, because I'm very apolitical in this space. I have my biases, let me be clear, but I'm very apolitical in terms of who's getting in or who's going out. But what are your thoughts on possible collaboration if that means a new government?
Yep. I'm glad you brought it up, because the headline in the Gazette said something like rules out, I don't know, working with others or something. I thought, well, that's not exactly right. I mean, I made the point of saying we're not rushing into that because we have a different obligation than the FDM and the independents. We form the formal opposition, the official opposition, and the nature of the OBA is it's been around for 10 plus years now, 12 years. And there are certain agreements or promises that we've made to the electorate, especially since the 2020 election. And so we can't compromise on those promises we made to the electorate, to the public. One of the promises, for example, was that we will roll out 36 candidates. The FDM has no such promise or obligation. The so-called independents coming under Sir John, they don't have that obligation. We have to appoint senators, appoint commissioners. We have to read every piece of legislation. We have to participate in debates, raise parliamentary questions. We have the reply to the throne speech is coming up. We have to do that. So it's a very different. We have a very serious, significant, and current, ongoing set of obligations. And so that means that, so for example, when someone were to suggest, well, how about you just don't run a candidate in this area? I go, well, I literally can't do that. There are promises, and the public expect us to run those candidates.
Okay.
Sorry, go on.
I just want to cut you off and go back, because you said respond to the throne speech. So you don't think that the Honorable Premier David Burt's going to be very calculated and drop that writ Friday then?
One thing David Burt is calculating, but as I've told people before, I don't decide my. My mood is not determined by which side of the bed David Burt woke up on.
Indeed, got you, and that makes perfect sense. All right, let's move. Since Cop Match, I've said on this show, I've been very complimentary of your approach as the leader of the One Bermuda Alliance. It seems you've been more vocal. Maybe you have or haven't, but just from my perspective, it seems you've been more vocal, more aggressive in your tone. However, there are still some people who feel throughout social media that the opposition is almost seemingly non-existent. What do you say to that?
There is no cap. It's a subjective measurement, right? So there's no cap as to how much I can communicate. I can always try more, but I remember I was out canvassing once, and a person said, "I don't hear from you much." And I thought, well, I was on the news last night. I'm on the front page of the paper tonight. But that might not be how they get their information. So it's understandable that they're not seeing it on social media. Yes, one of the things that I've learned since joining politics is that communication is not free. It takes time and money, and the OBA is a relatively small organization in comparison to others. The Progressive Labor Party is absolutely huge, millions of dollars in treasury, hundreds of members, thousands of members, hundreds of volunteers, and control of a $1 billion government. That they've got a lot of resources. but with that being said, we endeavor to communicate as clearly as much as possible. Using the website, using our newsletter, using our community events, our canvassing, using our social media feeds, which, with any luck, anyone's noticed over the last, I would say, 4 months, you would have noticed a huge increase in that as we sort of crossed a couple of different hurdles, because we're in this constant improvement. Right. The 2020 election was a significant moment in the history of the One Bermuda Alliance, and it made us sit down and reflect and redesign a lot of things. And so as we roll out these improvements, people ought to see them. If they don't see them, I'm happy to learn. I mostly learned on the doorstep, but I'm happy to learn any other way as well.
Okay. Audience, if you have any questions or comments for Jarion Richardson, please send them through. We'll get through as many comments and questions as possible. I want to take a bit of a shift. During Maya's news break a few moments ago, you saw her top story was on education. Currently, there's a lot going on with education that doesn't seem to be good. One of the OBA's plans in your platform is to establish an education authority. Before I even ask the question, I've said it on this show, and I'm not going to change my tone because Mr. Richardson isn't sitting here having a conversation with me. Personally and professionally, I think that the last authority that was created by the One Bermuda Alliance government was and has been a disaster for various reasons. I don't know if that's my opinion, by the way. A lot of people think without politics, it would work. To me, it's never been without politics. Based on its original standing, the Bermuda Tourism Authority was supposed to be self-sufficient after 3 years. No one holds that to account. But with that said about education going this route, what will this entail and how will it work?
If I can, I just want to take it to something far simpler that matters a lot more than all of these ideas that people come up with, and that is accountability and basics. I bring up accountability and basics because I don't think that we can appreciate, or enough people appreciate, just how much that matters. Basics may sound like something elementary, something anybody can do, something that don't worry about it. But the basics are what builds the foundation. The Navy SEALs, who are perhaps the preeminent military force globally, would tell you that unless you can, tie your boots right, you're not going to be able to do the sophisticated higher levels of soldiering. And that applies, by the way, for NASA putting rockets into space. You really do have to. If you can't make a level platform out of concrete, then you probably shouldn't try to launch a satellite. And that's what I'm seeing lacking in Bermuda right now. We seem to forget that it's the basics. I mean, the union mentioned that there hasn't been a proper substitute teachers list maintained. And you go, come on, guys, that's a list. This is come on, this is the stuff we should be able to do in our sleep. And the basics also, if we're clear about the basics and our expectations, then that means that we have a way to hold people accountable. So that's what you'll see across our entire recommendations. All of our platform ideas is underneath every one of those is the principle that first we have to get the basics right, and then we have to hold people accountable to the basics. And so to that end, and you'll see in authorities, authorities seem to take a life of their own. And one thing I would argue is we don't have enough time on our reflection. So an audit process, I work in anti-money laundering or regulatory compliance space, and we regularly have a requirement to audit programs. And that means it's a test and adjust. So once a year, you have to be able to look at the entire suite of your control environment. And then you have to be able to determine, okay, which one of these things is working, why and how, which one's not working, and then adjust accordingly. And you just don't see that. You don't see that audit process taking place. So I would argue that that's probably far more useful to governmental processes. And we used to have that in management services as a government department, but it seems to have gone very quiet.
I absolutely love what you just said with that. And I'm going to go off track real quickly because you said you used to have that in governmental departments, but I think that my view or perspective would probably differ if, in fact, we were auditing And I think when we think auditing, we usually just think money, but auditing.
Mm.
The Bermuda Tourism Authority is responsible for driving heads in beds or doing this and that, then there should be a clear audit. And if they're not
Yeah,
meeting
performance.
the performance, then
Hmm.
things should be able to happen. People should have to go rather than sticking around there making what they're making without the results. Now, in saying that, I want to go off track real quickly because you said we used to do that in government. And there's
Mm.
something, as I've shared publicly, it was my first time voting in a US presidential election, but my second time voting in the US. And one of the
Mhm.
things that they have on ballots, if you saw it across the US, they had
Oh,
abortion,
you mentioned.
they have housing things. In Florida, when I voted, there was voting for the water person in charge of water and different things
Mhm.
like that. In Bermuda, it's so simplified, and a lot of the complaints that Bermudians have are with civil service management. Right? I don't
Mhm.
know if it's because of the Westminster system, but what are your thoughts on like how they do things in the U.S.? Would you rather Bermudians have the ability to vote for like who's in charge of transport or who? Because I mean, Bermuda
Mhm.
complained about people not getting a bus schedule right. Right? Would you be
Yeah.
in favor of Bermudians voting for who's in charge of tourism or in charge of the education authority, stuff like that, because that makes people work for things, knowing that, you know what, this
Mm.
you're going to be accountable to the public. What are your thoughts on something like that?
Yeah, I'd have to give a little thought on the people on putting specific people in roles because I'm not sure where competency in politics there's a line there that I worry about because it is easy to be charismatic or rather it's easier to be charismatic than it is to be competent. So
Mhm,
what we don't want to do is wind up with a bunch of charismatic people who are not competent,
mhm,
which I feel was we that's what we suffer from a lot today
mhm,
in Bermuda. So I wouldn't want to do more of that, but just on the Westminster system, we just have to remember that we have a very outdated Westminster system.
mhm,
I mean, our if you thought of them as versions, I mean, we are multiple versions behind the norm for people who have Westminster systems.
mhm,
I mean, our House of Assembly can't even meet in the Sessions House anymore, so that means we don't have libraries, offices, meeting rooms, etc. Committee rooms. We can't have hearings unless we have to use the main chamber, and it's not built for that. So we're pretty far behind in our governance system. Insofar as I think it's a good idea to put things on ballots that require. So one of the things we put in there, I want to say it was in our last year's reply to the throne speech. We mentioned having regular referendums on matters of seriousness,
mhm,
and I like that. I think that we have to get the public to be involved, but also it's more that we can guide the politicians
mhm,
because as it stands right now, we have a few materials that are generated for public consumption, and then we sort of leave the politicians all to themselves, and then we're kind of surprised 4 years later why nothing happened. Well,
mhm,
it's because they're humans. They require guardrails and should be given effective constraints, especially to those with power. So I think including information, including parameters,
mhm.
um, clear guidance to people in authority is a brilliant idea, especially since we can then hold them accountable to that. And if we update our Westminster system, then those accountability mechanisms will come into place a lot easier. So I'm really looking forward to that. I think that's a great idea. Now, how to do it, it will be the
Right.
question because because everything in Bermuda seems to be twice as hard as it is everywhere else.
Yeah, you'd think that'd be the opposite since we're so small.
Yeah, and by the way, I do think that's correctable. So when I say that, I don't want to sort of leave it as a negative. I think that we as a country and a people need to get
mhm,
to grips with stop inventing things, stop inventing new ways of saying no, and start inventing new ways of saying yes.
indeed. Shifting gears again, Bermuda's roads.
Mhm.
They're in horrible condition. And let's give context to that because whenever I meet someone, I speak so very highly of the Bermuda I grew up in
Mhm.
versus the Bermuda of today.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
Pristine island, right? Beautiful,
yeah.
well-kept roads. When I was working in Bermuda tourism, and I would go all over the U.S. and meet with people, the things that they would say about the Bermuda that they knew is not what I see in Bermuda today. If I
Yeah.
were leader of Bermuda, I would be embarrassed if I actually cared about the island.
Right.
I would be embarrassed that under my watch, this is what's happening. No, it's easy to say, well, the infrastructure is old. Well, as a government, that's why you maintain and improve things. That said, the OBA has mentioned in their platform about establishing an infrastructure fund. What an infrastructure fund? What does that look like?
Sure. Let me. I just want to be clear about the roads and the infrastructure, our built derelict buildings and things like that,
Mhm,
because these things were, we're upset with them today, but
mhm.
they didn't fail today.
Correct.
They failed over the years.
Mhm,
They just got worse and worse, progressively worse. Well, why they get worse? Because we defunded the maintenance of these things, and so it's like death by a thousand cuts. So
mhm,
yes, we have now noticed that you know this is the disaster, but it was our this happened because taking a stand didn't happen early enough,
mhm,
and so that's why we're here today. So I always want to say that when it comes to our infrastructure, it's it didn't happen yesterday.
mhm.
I think I saw a government budget where they'd funded $500,000 for maintaining the roads. This was a couple of years back when we did a budget debate,
Yep.
and it just blew my mind. It floored me. I thought, it's a $5 million maintenance budget line item year on year, guaranteed. That's what it takes to maintain.
Mhm.
And someone thought, no, I can get away with just defunding it to the point, and now we have these roads. So I just want to bring that up. That maintaining roads and having roads, that requires a mature government willing to constantly pay for that as a priority instead of obviously defunding it for whatever side project. Now, insofar as the infrastructure fund, that relates to my point of, look, we have to take the maintenance of Bermuda seriously, and it
Mhm.
has to not be subject to political whims. So just think of the infrastructure fund as something that where we're able to isolate the funds that are required to maintain our infrastructure outside of political interference. And we're able to then also pool funds there so that when we have these major projects like the bridges, that we have a pool of money that's been saved and saved and saved and put forward for that. So we don't have so that some government minister has a bright idea of building a music studio or something like that. You can't just take money from our roads to build that. That's the concept behind isolating the funds.
I see what you did there. I like that.
Well, it's not. I think last time I was on the show, you'd asked me a question about the light bulbs, and I was like,
Yeah.
I don't know how I have an opinion about light bulbs. Like that's not a good idea. I think one of the things I'm most disappointed with since joining politics is um, the lack of acumen when we decide how to spend money. We seem to not have feasibility reports. We seem to not have audit processes. We just seem to, I don't know, just kind of dream up stuff, and then we kind of just go run down the road with it. And it's like, don't do that. That's people's money.
No, but it's as if we wing it. And I think
Yeah.
I'm happy that in like some of my groups with my guys, my boys and my friends, it's like more of them are tuned in. They're understanding affordable versus subsidized, things like that.
Mhm.
They're understanding that governments, and I'm not just going to say PLP,
Governments. Yeah.
governments have a tendency to spend money as if they have no skin in the game because they don't. It's not their money, right? So I don't think it's inaccurate to what you're saying.
Yeah.
I want to touch on something. I don't know if you saw the conversation. My brilliant colleague Maya Palacio had a conversation on Media Maya platforms with the Honorable Mark Bean on Monday of this week, and
I missed
then
that. Yeah.
we had Taj Dunville Otterbridge on, another spirited young person with a voice
Mhm.
in the community. And speaking with and listening to younger Bermudians, some of them have claimed that their concerns are things like climate change and human rights issues. That's what seems to top their list. Where does the OBA stand? And I know that's broad, right? But
Mhm.
if you can just choose a few things when it relates to climate change, the Honorable Mark Dean obviously said that if you listen to it, he's pretty much doesn't see it as real, right?
Mhm.
climate
Yeah.
change every day. And I don't want to quote him incorrectly, but you can watch it on your own. And then as far as human rights is, some people don't even think human rights are real. Like some people feel like certain things aren't human rights. Where does the OBA stand on these issues?
Yeah. So I mean, these are these are big ticket issues, and I doubt I could explain the entirety of them. I think I'm sort of shocked that someone would say human rights isn't a thing. That's probably just like, wow, that's we have to have some base level of treatment of one another, and we have had many examples in human history of what happens when we don't respect the rights of others,
Mhm.
not just, and I say just, it's the wrong word, but the transatlantic slave trade is the most prominent example, I think, for us in Bermuda. But um, the genocidal Nazi Germany regime against Jewish people, the wiping out of Native American populations in North America, the ongoing genocidal activities across the world, and so human rights isn't. Sometimes I think we think of these things as academic exercises,
Mhm.
and it horrifies me to think of that. No, people are people, and then you have to treat them as if we are the same, because the second you us them, you start that us them, that's the cracks in which the worst of human minds and activities will take place. Mao, Stalin, these are not isolated incidents. We see it occurring in Myanmar with the Rohingyas. These are this is a ever present concern in modern history, and I will never ever. And I think that's why I'm so opposed to the us themism
Mhm.
of modern politics. I go, that's because I know that's the crack. If we let that crack live, in there goes every evil thing that results in horrible
Mhm.
calamity. So, with that being said, shock over. And so far as climate change, Bermuda lives. We're an island 500 miles away from the nearest landmass, and there's not a lot of us Bermudians, and we are one Cat 5 away from becoming a Smithsonian exhibit. So I don't see how we can not take it seriously. So I mean, that's my 2 cents on it. Yeah.
I think what you just said may sound harsh, but it's so real, and I hope people latch on to what you're saying. That simple,
Mhm.
short statement. Bermuda's literally one Cat 5 away from being
Yeah,
a
I don't.
volcanic exhibit. And I don't want to sound extreme, but I don't
Yeah,
think people really understand that. So,
yeah, and I don't mean to inflame. I don't mean to, I'm not
Killmonger,
trying to
yeah.
fearmonger. I'm just, I just go, look, I know that we think we are permanent. All of us think that, right? We,
Mhm.
we walk through we think we're permanent. We think it's, and then someone gets hit by a bus and we're shocked. Look, human life is precious and it's relatively delicate. We
Mhm.
are not to toy with this,
Yeah.
and that's why I think of Bermuda as taking as taking our climate very seriously. Now, with that said, that is not the same as I think that every time someone comes up with a new climate engineering idea that we go roll it out, spend millions of dollars and slap it in the ocean and
Mhm.
go, yeah, look at us. And because I think that there's some virtue signaling in there.
Mhm.
Um, but at the same time, I take it incredibly serious.
Indeed. Let's go. One of the big issues, if not the biggest issue, and it was a huge issue in the United States based on exit polls, it was the economy. Um,
Mm,
the cost of living is a big talking point in Bermuda. I
yeah.
think that's how most people think that President Trump got over the line in
Mhm.
the fashion he did, because the price of eggs and bread and just it's rising, and people cannot afford to even live paycheck to paycheck. Bermuda is in a state where we it's I mean, when people tell me what their utilities bills are, I'm like, how can you afford to pay that, especially as a single person, right? Don't
Yeah.
be a single person with children. Well, what are the OBA's plans to lower the cost of living in Bermuda and make it more feasible for the average Bermudian to be able to live?
Mm. I think first we have to be very clear what we mean by cost of living, because then we have to tackle it one item at a time instead of as a theme, or as a you have to be very there are relatively few controls levers that we can pull in Bermuda. Push and pull, as a small place is subject to our largest trading partner. The US catches a sneezes, we catch a cold.
Mhm.
So we have to be quite refined in what we're doing. And I just want to say, on the cost of living, um, Bermuda has a very unusual economy in terms of how we determine how successful it is. We have a pressure valve, as it were, to the UK. So when someone is we have the ability simply to leave our economy.
Mhm.
And I think of the number of Bermudians who have just decided, okay, this is just too expensive, so I'm just leaving it. Now, just think about if those folks were unable to leave and go to the United Kingdom, them staying in Bermuda, the financial assistance, how much that fund would go up through the roof. So I always want to point out that we're lucky to have that relationship, and cost of living is shows that. Insofar as our direct actions on cost of living, food, energy, housing are our main contributors. And as it relates to food, we you already saw a consolidation of market actors. The PLP have had the cost of living commission that came up with a few good recommendations, but again, there's only so many levers that you can pull in that.
Mhm.
I think part of a wider food strategy is making the production of food locally important. Again, will we be able to make enough to consume
Mhm.
on island? Um, no, because we have 60,000 people and 21 square miles. But the fact is that we can reduce the price by consuming local goods, by making sure that it's easy to produce food in Bermuda and then consuming that as a matter of priority.
Mhm.
Um, on energy, for example, expanding the powers of the legislative responsibility of the regulatory authority to make sure they take into consideration when they approve energy prices,
Mhm.
taking into consideration cost of living concerns and consumer concerns. In housing, by rebalancing the landlord-tenant relationship or legislation. I can't tell you how many houses we've canvassed where we've asked the landlord, "Your place is empty. Why is it empty?" And they go, it's just too much fuss. It's going to cost me. Ironically, it's going to cost me more, or to rent it out than it would be to simply put family in there
Mhm.
whenever they visit or something like that. So it's not just economics is a social science. So it's not just a question of which tax and tariff to play with. It's also a question of what to make easier and harder in Bermuda so
Mhm.
that people can contribute to reducing that. But the biggest one is really is expanding the population.
Mhm.
We have to spread costs across more people. The fewer people that we have in Bermuda, especially as those fewer people then age,
Mhm.
because don't forget, at some point, a person who's aging is going to stop contributing
Mhm.
into that bucket.
Mhm.
They're only going to be able to pull from that bucket um, as the proportion of that population increases. We then now have fewer and fewer people. So not only do we have people leaving and not paying into the bucket, but we also have people who are aging and not able to contribute to that bucket. So we do have a serious problem.
And audience, I'm going to get to the various questions and comments, but in saying that, I think that was a big thing when the One Bermuda Alliance was in government previously, governing Bermuda. Was, I think, the whole pathways to status thing. One of the concerns is, I think both parties and most Bermudians understand the need to grow the population, but both sides seem to have different perspectives on what that looks like. Is one side believes that the other is about growing the population to maintain political power. The other side is about growing the population, probably bringing Bermudians back home first. What are your thoughts on how do we grow the population? How do we go about growing it? Whereas, because Leona Nanang Amadale says Bermudians are also not too many years away from being a minority in their own country.
Um, Yeah, so I saw the deputy premier was speaking, or was the premier speaking about Kamanians being a minority. I think what they're talking about is the number of people of non-Kamanians in
Mhm.
the country versus the number of Kamanians.
Mhm.
But I think we should bring up the Kamanians are still the ones who were politically in charge and make all the political decisions and vote and guide the direction of their country. So yes, I take the point that there are more non-Kamanians than Kamanians in Cayman, but Kamanians still retain control of everything. Expanding the population. Yes, so we're going to have to incentivize people to not only come into Bermuda, but stay in Bermuda. And that really goes back to making life in Bermuda easier. It goes back again to back to basics. I feel like a broken record sometimes, but we do have to make life in Bermuda easier for people to be willing to stay here and Bermudians to be willing to return. Now, the probability or plausibility of people overseas returning to Bermuda, I don't think has been dealt with in any serious way because it's not just economy that causes people to leave and go overseas. It's a lot of things, including cultural exposure. Some people go into either the US and Canada or the UK or New Zealand, Australia, and these places, and they like what they see, and you can't replicate that in Bermuda. They were there for those things, or they have family there, and they're closely connected to family or projects or career. So it's not just a question of making the economy better attracts Bermudians back to Bermuda. It's not that simple.
Okay. Let's go to the audience. It's quite a few questions and comments in audience. As I said, I will get through as many as possible. We'll start with Charles H. Jeffs II. He's asking, as a leader, don't you want the best 36 people to sit in the House, regardless of party or no party affiliation? That said, as Premier, would you be open to having a non-OBA MP to serve in cabinet?
Yes. Could you put the question up, though? It was a couple different lines, and I just like that. Thanks. Open to a non-OBA member. Yeah, so Craig Cannoneer started that, and with inviting a non-OBA member MP to sit in the cabinet. I'm not opposed to that. I certainly don't have it to mind. When it comes to the conversation of constituting a cabinet, these are very advanced conversations because we speak about, for example, coalition government. And first you have to have enough people in the House of Assembly to even have that conversation. And as it stands right now, getting MPs into the House is hard. Is hard and requires a lot of effort. And that's the focus of a political party, right? Is to create members of parliament. So when every time someone says, when you're premier or something like that, I'm like, listen, we got that's a long road. It's not guaranteed. But also, could you bring the question back up? There was a first part to it. Best people, I want to say, in government. That's it. Don't you want the best 36? I'll qualify that. No, I don't want that as a leader. I want that as a Bermudian. I want the best 36 people to sit in the House. And that would be fantastic. I think you touched on this in another show. One of the things that prohibits us from getting the best people, I guess, because I think we have a great team in the One Bermuda Alliance, is we have a very small population, and you can only have so many representatives out of that population. So we have 46,000 registered voters ish. You have 5,000 employees in government ish. They can't do any. You have their family members who are cognizant that, well, do I want to interfere with their career, job, etc. It is, we've already seen examples where if you're trying to leave government to join politics, it is not made any easier by government. Then you have those employed in international business whose companies simply would prefer not to become involved in local political matters. So that's another 5,000, add their family members. Police, small business owners, entrepreneurs who think, it's proven, my business will take a hit, especially if I have any government contracts, or just voters who just don't, just disagree with my political views, might not buy services from me. So that number dwindles really fast. So the number of Bermudians who are actually capable of representing their communities is relatively small.
Indeed. Another question. Dorian says, what's happening in C9 with Vic Ball and Vance Campbell?
Yeah, so that's an internal party matter. That's so what happens is our constitution is public though, and I can't speak to the exact pieces of what's happening pursuant to the constitution, but it applies, and it's going through that process at the moment. Yeah.
Okay.
And one of the reasons I want to be always fair is that it would be unfair to Vance and Vic if I were to speak publicly on the matter, because both of them have rights under the Constitution that I'm, by the way, I'm a kind of by the book person. So I guess that's what happens when your primary career is regulatory compliance.
I can tell you a lot of people in the audience, their minds are going to be like drama in the OBA from that. But no, thank you for that response.
Drama,
Uh,
yes. Yeah, I would say one thing I always want to point out is there's when it comes to drama, I'm a calm kind of person, but when I was in the police, I got to see um, drama, people in bad situations, in hurt situations, and getting hurt and requiring intervention. Politics, yes, is a human science. It's people, but the one thing I would definitely say in the OBA is it's not like that.
mhm,
I've seen drama, and
okay.
it is not something we seek to emulate or whatever put forward. So yeah, it's
Mark Arthur C. Phillips is asking, his on the OBA platform, your party speaks of back to basics policies. In your present role as the opposition, have you begun to implement these policies?
it sort of depends where he's talking about, because there's different, because he says opposition. So yes, there's opposition leader, but I occupy multiple roles. So
Mhm,
I'm not sure if he's talking about as the opposition leader, applying those to the parliamentary caucus
mhm,
in terms of how we get to parliamentary questions, which matters we bring up, which pieces of legislation we bring forward, or
mhm.
is he talking as party leader to the policies and processes within the One Bermuda Alliance? Those are two separate roles. So
Okay.
I don't know which one he's talking about.
Okay. WKD Llama's asking, do you believe the perceived relationship of OBA UBP has hindered the OBA from getting support of the larger community?
Yeah, so I was never a member of the United Bermuda Party. I don't know enough about it, to be frank, but it is a curiosity to me to see the United Bermuda Party legacy of the people in the in the United Bermuda Party come back to life in the now named independence, and them to be getting so much support. Because if our if our members, most of whom have left now, those members came from the UBP, and that was deemed bad in the wider larger community, or we lost some support because of that. So I don't understand how the independents now get support
Mhm,
because they're also former UBP. So but yes, I would say people have stopped us. Aisha, I want to say Pete's raised it in an interview on Youth Connect. So it has come up in the past,
mhm,
that some of our members are some of the founding members who left the United Bermuda Party to form the OBA. Um, some people have said, "Well, I don't like that about you."
mhm, okay. Mark Arthur C. Phillips asking, how does the OBA plan to create the environment for Bermudians to thrive, but also cultivate conditions for foreign investment?
That goes across the entire platform. It's all of this. So I mentioned before something that's quite small. The regulatory authority changing their legislative mandate to make sure that they have to take into consideration other things, and they take into consideration today. I'd mentioned accountability across the system, but think about we have an accountability in government program in our platform that includes things like publishing calendars for meeting dates, committee meeting dates, making parliamentary committees open to the public as a matter of as a default, instead of making it a vote process within the committee, things like that. So it's across it. We have to make life easier in Bermuda. Get back to basics means across the board.
Mhm,
What are those little bits and pieces that stop this mechanism from working properly? If that isn't an actual safeguard or control, then get rid of it, because it's just a new way of saying no.
mm. Charles H. Jeffers II, he's asking, would that infrastructure fund be a certain percentage of the annual budget?
Yeah, we're gonna have to see. So the One Bermuda, when the One Bermuda Alliance formed a government, we discovered a number of things that we had not known in opposition. So one of the things that Shadow Finance Minister Dr. Doug Takuto, and I agree on is there's a lot in there that we're going to have to get to grips with when we lift the hood of the car and take a look in and go, okay, we see this. We're able to do this, and this, and be very transparent about our findings.
Okay. We've got Renee Simmons asking if a snap election was called, do you have the full amount of candidates for each constituency currently available?
Yes. So we have the 36 filled up. One of the things you learn though is that conditions change over time. And so, for example, if someone, their mother is falls ill overseas, they have to fly overseas, and you don't know how long that person will be overseas, things like that. We also have multiple people lined up for seats. So a person might want to. A person like, so for example, we adopt a candidate into a constituency and that person is then in the process of changing jobs, or they're working in government or there's a number of reasons why we're not going to roll them out, or we might just not want to roll them out in at that specific time. We want to actually line it up with a different event that we're doing.
Mhm.
So there's a lot of reasons, but the short answer is yes, we have 36.
Alrighty.
And that, by the way, was one of our, again, that promise was quite explicit from the 2020 election. So it's very important to us.
All right. Michael Daniels says, Mr. Richardson, you have some interesting thoughts. Do you plan to do more interviews so that the public can get to know you?
Absolutely. Absolutely. We have a great comms person who helps with scheduling these things. And I'd love to do more interviews. I have enjoyed this. One thing I have enjoyed about politics is being able to speak to a lot of different people and then being able to take those conversations into a more public place setting like this, and to say, I've got this thought and it's really formed up because I spoke to all these other people. It's one thing I love about canvassing is that you just get to speak to so many people.
I want to, this comes up every now and then. A young person put it on X yesterday. What are your thoughts on absentee voting? And I'm not just talking about people who are overseas in school, but Bermudians who are still tied to the island some way. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, the OBA has come out in the past and said that we're for absentee voting. Part of it will have, the thing we're going to have to figure out about it is how are you eligible for absentee voting? So in other words, do you have to, there's a phrase in the Constitution, I want to say, or the Parliamentary Elections Act, that says something like ordinarily resident in Bermuda. So this is where our legal beavers are going to have to suss that out. But yeah, in principle, definitely. The question is, where is that line drawn? Because what you don't want to do, you want to make sure that someone actually has an interest in Bermuda and is and I'm not sure where that line is, but I don't see a problem with it at all. In fact, we espoused it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's so, it represents an archaic Bermuda when you can say that people have been removed from the registry who've been left for like 5 years versus someone who's left 10 years, who's still on the registry and hasn't even visited Bermuda. It's just, it's interesting. And I think the line's so blurred with that. I think obviously you want to avoid potential fraud and the like. How are you going to be able to monitor whether someone's passed away who's overseas and someone else is voting on their behalf? It's a lot of security issues, I guess. It's a lot. But I think the current process is probably outdated and definitely needs to be looked into.
And that goes back to my point for all of our governance systems, Westminster systems. They're all generally outdated. So it's quite a lot. And I think that's why we have a hard time holding politicians accountable in Bermuda, is because we have a system that really does need an uplift.
Indeed. Before I let you go, I think it may have been Oakland, California, they recalled their mayor this week. I know that correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe in the 2012 platform, the One Bermuda Alliance had mentioned something about recalling MPs. look, people get very unhappy with politicians. I keep telling people, a lot of people keep saying, well, we've got 4 years of Donald Trump. That's not true.
Mm.
You've got 2 years, because to vote for Congress, people, is every 2 years.
Yeah.
And if you're not happy in this first 2 years, you can flip Congress. And Congress is where a lot of the power is held. So I want people, we make a lot of statements where fairly or unfairly, we're not educated on certain systems, right?
Yeah.
That said, that he's been given a mandate in the US, and the people have to hold him accountable. In Bermuda's context, the recall of an MP, I believe that the people deserve a right to recall an MP. What's your take as leader, and maybe your party stance on being able to recall an MP?
Yeah. Recall. Look, we have to have a way of holding folks accountable, but one thing we don't want to do is make it so that our electoral system is fickle. Because what we don't want to do is because an MP, I don't know, just let's use an extreme example, just wore the wrong clothes to work one day. You don't want that to trigger a whole parliamentary process. So we do have to figure out where that line is. Now, what I would say is we probably have a bigger problem in that I'm more concerned at this point with making sure that our parliamentary process, including our elections, are updated and secure. We'd mentioned before in C36, I think it's a great example, and everyone who canvasses will tell you this, is that not every house you go to on the register actually either has someone in it or has the right person in it. And so, and we talk about voter turnout, well knowing that these records are quite dated. I'm probably more worried right now that we need to make sure that the people who are voting, that their vote counts far more, or counts properly, I should say. Counts properly, instead of right now where we have, again, we know that there are people who've moved, and that, I'm being generous here, picking the least worst of the examples, people who've moved and things like that. So I'm more worried about that. Insofar as the point about the MP being accountable to the constituents, absolutely 110%. Will a recall system do that? It probably would, but we'd have to make sure that it's not fickle, because you do not want a never-ending cycle of by-elections and recall elections. We've seen that in other countries. It costs a lot of money. It distracts from the big issues that the community is dealing with.
Indeed. All right. Before you head out, the speech from the throne is tomorrow, reconvening of Parliament. This could be a writ maybe drop tomorrow. It could not.
Sorry, before I go, I do have to make sure I mention our work team is having a town hall on Thursday, 14th of November at Workman's.
Okay.
And if I did not mention that, I doubt Senator DeCuto and all of the work team, Dion, would be happy with me.
All right. The 15th.
Yes, on the the 14th, Thursday the 14th.
14th, yeah. Thursday the 14th at Workman's.
Yeah. Sorry, you were saying about the possibility of a writ in an election.
Yeah, there's a possibility that the premier may drop a writ or not. In the event that he does, Renee Simmons already asked, do you have candidates? In the event he does, how prepared are all of your candidates to go full steam ahead right now to capture the government to serve Bermudians?
110% and willing. I think, and I just want to, when you volunteer for something like this, and we make sure we communicate to candidates that when that general election is called, it's go time. And it's a big ask on people's lives, the big ask, especially for parents and business owners, because they have a full life. And what we're asking them to do, not just we as a party, and not just we as already elected officials, but we as Bermudians, as Bermudian voters, are asking of them. It's a big, big ask. So I always have an incredible amount of respect and time for anyone who's willing to to put their hand forward and to become a candidate. And I can definitely say for our candidates, they are 100% prepared and willing to go into a general election.
Mhm. Jarion Richardson, thank you so much for this conversation this morning. As said, you've been, it could just be me, very vocal over the last couple of months, holding the government to account. My hope, and I'll be very direct with you, I've said it to many premiers before, my hope is that if you do become the premier as the leader of the One Bermuda Alliance, is that we've seen it happen. You become a better leader, but don't change to the point where now maintaining power becomes the most important.
Oh yeah, that's the worst possible outcome. Yeah,
absolutely. So we wish you the best. Please know this platform is open to any and every person interested in sharing their political perspectives and their plans with Bermuda. I thank you for making time for us and our audience. And if you haven't already, please fill out our survey.
will do. Thanks, Mel.
Thank you.
Take care, everybody.
Jarion Richardson, opposition leader, please give a thumbs up, a love, a like if you appreciated that conversation today. We're going to take a quick break, 57 seconds, come back, daily play. Whoever gets this right will be eligible for tomorrow's prize. But make sure you share the conversation with your friends, your family, and your colleagues.